I'm 25 and I don't know how to handle this. This is not what I thought being a teacher was going to be like. I don't know how to do this. And my dad just simply said, you told me when you decided to become a teacher that you wanted to do this because you thought you could be an example of perfect love in the world, that you thought you could go into places and that you could just be hands and feet without ever saying a word, and this is your first opportunity to really walk that out and do that. And so that was a defining moment for me to say, I can't walk into my classroom and say these things and do these things in an outward way, but I sure can help people heal through what I know has healed me in my life. And so that's really, that's how I approach everything that I do, that I really believe the work that I'm doing is work that allows me to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And then about 3 years ago, I was introduced to Rebecca Lewis-Pankratz, who also attends here now, and she works with me at ESDAC, and there's this science out there. So all of these things that I've been researching about hope, and I've been applying these things in my own life and in my own classroom, and then it turns out that there's like this vast amount of research and science behind the things that I was experiencing. And it blew my mind, but what it did is it created a huge opportunity for people to actually step out of the hidden trauma and say, we all are experiencing this to some level, or we will all experience this to some level, and how can we do something about it? So I've dedicated probably the last 2 full years of really finding and researching and seeing how can I help people plant these places in our own communities? How can we go into schools is where we started and help teachers do this? But now we're really starting to say this is bigger than teachers. This is something that everybody needs. And so it's kind of made it my own little, passion project to figure out how to help our community do this. I'm from Hutch. I grew up here. I left for a few years to teach in other places, but this is home. And I want this place to just prosper in abundance of a life of love. And so that's kind of how we ended up here. Scripturally, just a little bit, just to kind of anchor you into where I'm coming from with this, I spent a lot of time looking at Romans 5, which Sean has preached on. There's kind of like a lot of parallels here where I stole a lot of stuff from Sean, I'm just going to be real. But in Romans 5, where we talk about this hope cycle, that the things that we've experienced in life, these afflictions that we've experienced, they provide for us this endurance, which builds some character, which allows us to have hope. But then the power of that hope is that then we go out and we spread that hope and we bring more people into the body of Christ by saying, this is what I've done, this is how I've healed, and you can have this too. This is a gift for you too. As well as what I think Sean preached, was it Romans 10, I think, right? So we're not of those that shrink back. And that is a phrase that is played over and over in my life, that every trauma I've hit, Katie, you're not of those that shrink back. You can overcome this too, because I'm here with you. I will get down and dig in with you, and we'll figure this out. But then I've always had this, right? And then I also like that science side that tells me that I'm not alone and other people see this too. I like numbers. I like scripture and I like numbers. So I want to share a little bit about numbers with you. So on your table there you have a couple of documents, and I didn't know how many people to expect or anything, so I just printed one set for each table. I've got some up here too, Quentin and Heather, you can. But on your table, you have a paper that has this on it. And we posted, the TFH Facebook page posted a video too that goes a little bit more in depth to some of this. But on here, this is the basics of the ACE study. So basically there are a couple of scientists who, they did a research study with 17,000 people, mostly middle-class white Americans, okay, that were in the Kaiser Permanente health plan. And they started asking them questions about their past. And it was really tied to a weight loss study at first. And they started asking these questions about things that they experienced in their childhood and making these connections to what was happening to them as adults and the long-term effects of things that were happening. So this list is not, it is a very limited list. These are the 10 things that popped out most commonly as adverse childhood experiences is what ACE stands for. So these are things that are seen to happen in children before the age of 18 that then influence their future. And so you have things like the things that we would expect. We have abuse on there, so sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. We have physical and emotional neglect. And then we have loss of parent through either death, divorce, or abandonment, incarceration, substance abuse within the family, family violence or violence in a neighborhood, and then caregiver mental illness. And as we look at this list, what they found is that the more ACEs you had, the more things that happened to you as a child, the higher the chance of negative health outcomes in your future. And this just explained so much to me, right? So higher incidences of cancer, of broken bones, of stroke, risky behavior. So higher incidences of that person then turning to substance abuse or other risky behavior, chronic pain. And for me, this really clicked. This is slightly diving into my story a bit, but I had suffered from years from chronic back pain. Just chronic back pain. And I would talk to doctors about it and nothing was really happening. And then finally, I had a doctor who would listen and diagnosed me with endometriosis, and I was able to have surgery and the back pain went away. And then 3 months later, I'm driving down the highway and I'm thinking about how, I'm listening to a book actually that's talking about some of this. It's called The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, and she's talking about how the body keeps score and how over time the things that have happened to us, our body keeps score of those things. And I'm thinking about how I'm having chronic migraines all of a sudden. And so as I'm driving down this highway, I'm thinking, having one of those moments, I have lived years with this back pain and it went away because I had a medical fix. And man, my body found another way for that trauma to come back in and do something else. And it just hit me that I'm not going to escape this doing what I'm doing right now. I have to continue to find ways to heal from things that I'm obviously not healing from yet. And so that's really what the ACE study found, was that things have happened to us, and over time we haven't been able to heal from them because we're not searching in the right places necessarily. The healing has to happen at an internal soul level as well as a physical level, right? So the other paper that you have at your table kind of goes a little bit deeper into how this plays out in Kansas in the United States. So you have two. And tonight really is just an introduction. If you want any more information, please, let's find a time to sit and chat because I can talk about this for days. But that's not an understatement. You have two papers. One has a list that looks like this, and the other just has the United States. I can't find both of them on my table right now. I want you to look at those with the people you're sitting with right now and just take a look at the distribution of ACEs across the United States and the distribution of them as you break them down into categories. Have a short little conversation with people around you. What do you notice? What are you curious about on that paper? And then we'll kind of come back together here in just a minute and discuss that a little bit further. I set it down somewhere. It's good. I'm good. You're good. If you notice, about 55, 56, yes, you.
On your last one, did a household member go to prison? I have a brother that went to prison, but he wasn't part of the immediate household.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. We'll address some of those things in just a couple of minutes because that would be different. That would be a different look at it, for sure. You'll notice about 55% of people have had 0 ACEs. Okay? Remember, this is that list of 10 things. So when I think about this list, there are things that you could experience in your life that are traumatic that didn't make this list. One for me was I had a dog who died when I was a 7th grader, right? I mean, it was just a moment, but like nobody really talked to me about it. It just kind of, we found the dog on the street and we went to school that morning and it was just kind of like it was no big deal, but it really was because it was my dog. That was a traumatic experience for me. It's not listed, right? Because, general population, how many people are going to have that? So we got to understand that a little bit. There are things you're going to see that you're going to be like, well, I experienced this and it was traumatic. It's not on the list. Does it count? It counts. It counts, okay? But about half, over half of the population has not experienced an ACE. But then once we look at 25% of people have had at least one thing on this list. And then it goes that 8% in Kansas have had two or more, or two ACEs, and then 11% have had three or more ACEs. And it's at that 3 mark that we start to see a higher incidence of behavior outcomes, higher incidence of medical outcomes. My ACE score is a 7 out of the list of 10, okay? And so that starts to explain things that I've experienced in life. My sisters grew up in the exact same house as me, same exact house. They report an ACE score of a 3. So even growing up in the same nuclear family, you can have differences, right? And so there's things that explain that. There's a stepfather that targeted one child and not the other. There's kids who were in kindergarten when things were happening, and the other was a 3rd grader. And so the mental ability to process something is very different at the age of 9 compared to the age of 5, right? So those things all come into play when we're talking about this. But what we do know is that ACEs impact our bodies from the time of conception on. So if you think about that, if you think we were formed in the womb and we have a being, we have something that we're expected to do at that point, Jesus knows who we are, all of that's happening, then that means the things that are happening in the world are impacting us as well at the same time. Then if we look at the distribution of ACEs and we look at what's happening to people in our state, what sticks out most to me is the fact that poverty and divorce are the most prevalent ACEs. And I think about how much we talk about those things, but how little weight we put on their impact. Right? That divorce is a big deal. And we think of it as a grown-up issue, but it's impacting the children. We think of poverty as being a grown-up issue, but it's impacting children. And that creates patterns throughout life. So that's really what this is about those patterns throughout life. What other things, are there other questions or thoughts you have? We're going to go into a survey here too in just a second, but just on these distributions, is anything rising, questions you have or thoughts you're bringing up for you right now?
Just a comment that I think is really, really, really important. The home I was raised in, my siblings would have a completely different experience. And when I began to talk about my own whatever, it infuriated them because they felt like I was being disingenuous too. And so let me encourage you that I think sometimes why some things may stay hidden is, and it's almost as bad as the trauma itself, is the inability of the atmosphere around to acknowledge that you're hurt.
Yes, absolutely. And that's something as we get further into what we're trying to create here, that's exactly something that we would explore. In this process, we'd call it like a hidden message that you might be walking around with that you're unaware of that is influencing the decisions you make on a regular basis. Any other thoughts or wonderings? Yes. Yes. We like to define it as it's anything that creates toxic stress in your body. And toxic stress is defined as the combination of powerlessness, isolation, and overwhelm. So I think about like a kid getting lost in a store, right? I mean, like this has happened to every parent. I think your child has wandered away from you because they do. And in that moment when you find them, And that look on their face, they didn't know where to go. They had no power to find you. They were powerless. They were isolated from that person who was supposed to keep them safe and have them, even though likely it's because they ran off. And they were overwhelmed likely by the stimulation around them. I don't know. I'm in a store I've been in 100 times, but I don't know where to go at this point, right? So that combination creates toxic stress in our body. A lot of us are walking around like that in situations now. A lot of careers that we have put us in places of toxic stress where we don't feel like our opinion matters. We don't feel like we have choices. We don't feel like we can do the job we're supposed to do, and we don't feel like we can go anywhere, right? I mean, these are life issues as well. So, I mean, we're talking about it at a child level, but this is things that we can still experience at the age of 60, right? That toxic stress. That's huge. That's huge. It's the perception. I like to just say perception is reality. If it was traumatic for you, it was traumatic. And nobody else can judge that level for you, absolutely. On your table, you have a two-sided document, and the one side is ACEs, and that's what I'm going to invite you to look at now. And then we're going to switch to the good side of this, which is resilience. But I'd like to invite you to take a moment to go through that ACE scale right now. You do not have to write anything down on here. You do not have to, you can look at that first question and you can decide, I'm out. I don't want to think about this right now. Absolutely fine. Okay? But on that list, if you just mark down the things that you have experienced, we're not sharing numbers, we're not going to talk about them in depth this evening at all, but I invite you to kind of look through there and figure out what is your ACE number. To answer your question a little bit, the ACEs really are based on things that happened at the age of 18 and under, based on the home that you were living in. So in your situation, if there was a sibling that was incarcerated and it impacted you to a traumatic level, it would count. If it didn't, or you weren't living in the home anymore, those things would not count. So you have interpretation abilities here, okay? So looking at those numbers, sometimes this can be emotionally activating because we're thinking about things maybe we don't typically think about. And so I'm going to invite you to understand that I'll stick around for a few minutes afterwards if there's a little bit of unpacking you need to do before you walk out the doors this evening. But I want to move into the resilience side of this. So resilience is, it's called the science of hope. And so for me, it's a really beautiful place because it's one of those places where science and faith come together. And so it's hard for anybody to argue, which I like that. But it is where we build relationships. So I'm going to be, I think he walked out, right? So I'm going to be honest here. Yeah, He's gone.
We in charge.
When Quentin did the sermon, the first from Trauma to Trust, he walked back in, from Trauma to Trust Part 1, he talked a little bit about resilience, and I came up to him afterwards and I say, oh, you really triggered me here, because he defined resilience in the way that most of the world defines resilience, is that ability to bounce back, the ability to take something that has happened to you and overcome it. And I think that is true. That might be a definition of resilience. But I want you to think about times in your life that you've ever bounced back from something on your own. Because I've never done that. Harvard defines resilience as our ability to overcome the things that have happened to us within the context of supportive, connected, stable relationships. And so when I think about that for myself, it comes to the relationships that I have, not only in the world, but the relationship that I have with Jesus, right? That those are the things that heal us. So we were talking, he walked us through Exodus and talking about the escape from Egypt. It was the relationship that the Israelites had with each other and with Jesus that allowed them to walk through that time together. It wasn't anyone's own individual ability to pull themselves up from their bootstraps, right? That those bootstraps, nobody's bootstraps are strong enough to pull themselves up. That just isn't the way we typically work. We seek out connection, we seek out relationships, and we heal together from there. And that's what builds resilience, is when we reach out and we say, I'm hurting, and I need somebody to sit down in this with me. And that some of us do that on our own. We sit and we find a spot and we ask God to sit in there with us. And we also typically also reach out to people that we're connected with to do that. And that's what resilience is. Resilience also shows up for us, that science, that hope, often shows up for us in the lowest of our places, which I think is what you were speaking of on Sunday, that it is in the depth of our despair that we remember to reach out for that and that we can build that hope. I have just a couple of examples of how I've done that, because I think sometimes that helps people connect to it a little bit. The first time in my life that I recall feeling hopeful was I was a sophomore in high school, and my mom was married to a man who was an alcoholic, and he was having a seizure. And it was towards the end of this relationship, I knew that she wanted to leave, but maybe didn't have a way out. And he's having a seizure, and she asked me to watch him while she went to get help. And I stood in the doorway of this bedroom, and I was filled with this overwhelming laughter, which is not the appropriate reaction to have in a moment like this, right? But I was filled with, it was just a belly full laugh. And the only way I can think back and describe that now is that I knew that at this point, something was going to change. He was going to be out of our lives soon, for one way or another. Then that doesn't matter, what the outcome of that didn't matter. It was that moment of knowing that what I had been looking for, the pain that we had endured, was going to come to an end, and that there was a hope for a future for us. And that gave me the courage to talk to some friends about it and start getting help that I needed, right? So that was a moment of hope for me. It was a moment where I could draw on some resilience. Another piece of that for me was when before Sadie was born. And we were told that she had a high risk of having trisomy 18, which is not good. And in that time, it was really hard for me to reach out to the whole world and share what we were experiencing. And so instead, I found a couple of friends who I knew would pray intentionally with us for specific things, and not opening it up to the whole world, right? Not just putting on Facebook that this is what we're experiencing and having the negative influence come in, but just reaching out to intentional friends that would pray intentionally with us for specific things. And every week when we went back to the doctor, something new had been healed. And so it was in those moments that I was finding connection both with people here in the physical world that were connecting me to Jesus as well, that helped me walk through that. And that influenced my ability to persevere through those challenges, but it also built within me the character I need to be where I'm at now and act on the calling that I think I have to do this work, right? Because I've experienced it, I can go forward and do it. And so it's those relationships that build this for us. When I look at my resilience score, which you're going to have an opportunity to look at here in just a moment, when I look at that score, my resilience score is a 14. I can mark off on this back list, I can mark off everything. Sisters, grown up in the exact same household, resilience score of a 5. Right? The higher our resilience, the more likely we have the ability to overcome things because we have stronger relationships that help us see a way out, that help us build that hope. And that's what we're trying to create here. Right? On Sunday, Pastor Quentin said, we want a place where we see each other through the eyes of Christ. That's what resilience is when we see each other that way. And what's amazing about resilience is it can be built at any point in life. You can have an ACE score of 10, and you can decide to come into this work at the age of 80 and build your resilience by finding safe, secure, connected relationships that are anchored in God's word, which is amazing. So I want you to take a look now at this survey of 14 things and how many of those things were true for you as a child and how many of them are true for you still today. So those numbers might be different. You can underline it, you can circle it, you can put a star next to it. There's no rules, Annie, it doesn't matter. They're really tall. Yeah. You don't remember? Yeah, that's okay. Then you would answer how you feel today. So you could answer it for the resilience that you think you have today by changing, instead of thinking of it from the past, just right now, people notice I'm capable and I can get things done. Because that would help you inform you the level of resilience you'd have now in your life. If you can't remember, that's fine. I can't make you remember right now, in other words. Obviously, this is something where we want the higher score, right? We want to have strong resilience, but what we really need to know is that we can continue to build it. And that's what I'm hoping to help us establish here. As we kind of begin to close, I'm going to let Heather close here in a few minutes. We're going to do something first as an example of the type of work that I'd like to invite people to come in and do with me. Our ultimate hope, I think, here is that we begin a Sunday school class that explores some of this at a deeper level, that we would meet at that school hour of church on Sundays and explore a little bit of it. So I'm going to give you a taste of one of the exercises or processes that we might go through to help us build resilience together, see each other, and begin to heal. Our mantra at ESDAC for this work is, I see you, I hear you, I'm with you. And that's really what we believe. And the way we build resilience, like I said, is through those relationships, and they happen at any point. So I want to invite you at your table to share one of those relationships. And so I wrote just the little guiding here, because I'm going to give you directions, and then you're going to start talking, and you're going to forget what I said, because you will. I've been a teacher long enough to know that. You're not really going to listen to my directions. But I'm going to give you an example. So what I want you to talk about is someone who gave you a message that you've been able to carry with you that's built resilience for you in your life. So an example that I give here is when I was in high school, late high school, I started to attend a different local church because a friend invited me to youth group. That's how it always goes, right? That's how we always end up there. A friend invited me to youth group, and our youth pastor was just this young guy from Sterling College. Okay, I don't know that he really had any credentials at all to be a youth pastor other than he liked kids and he went to Sterling College. But youth group ran from about 6:30 to 9 every Wednesday. And we would meet at the church, and we would hop on the church van, and we'd go to Taco Bell. And we would eat. I always got a Mexican pizza with no meat. And he just let us be goofy and unpack the day and just sit there at Taco Bell and just be nerdy high school kids. And then we would go back to the church and we would have some kind of lesson. And that usually lasted about an hour. And then that second hour of youth group, we just got to hang out and talk about life, right? And I was going through some pretty big stuff at that time, and I didn't really talk to a lot of people about it. But this guy was able to create this space where if I did need to talk about it, it was okay to talk about it. And if I wanted to come in and just be silly and high-strung and bouncing off the walls and talk too much about whatever I wanted to talk about, he let us do that too. So it was this message. It was, the role was, it was my youth pastor. And what he did was he gave us space to be kids in a safe place that was judgment-free. And the message I got was it's okay to not be okay sometimes, and it's okay to be okay. That whatever I'm feeling is absolutely okay to feel, and that he was going to let us feel that. And it was just something that I've been able to carry with me into adulthood, that days are going to suck, and that's hard, and days are going to be awesome, and that's awesome. But at the end of it, I still get to be okay. So I'm going to invite you at your table to just talk through. Who is someone? What was their role? You don't have to name them if you don't to. What was their role? And that is important. I want you to make sure you're specific there. What did they do? And what message did you take away from them? So we're just going to give you about 1 minute each to kind of go through that. And then we're going to close that up, and Heather will close us down for the night. You will. Who was your person? Yeah. So as you kind of wrapped up those stories, and I apologize if not everybody got to share, how many of you, we would call this an enlightened witness, it'd be the name, a name for this, right? How many of you, was it somebody you paid to listen to your story? A therapist, or was it? David's like, I'm out. Right? Or was the person who gave you a message a teacher, a pastor, a close family member, a friend of the family, right? What this means is that, and we find this over and over when we do this work, that those relationships are what come out most. Typically, it is someone within the church community that you exist in or the school community you existed in as a child that was the people who were your enlightened witnesses. It's people who saw you out of the crowd and said, I'm going to spend some extra time there. There's something here. And it made you feel, you knew that person saw you. You might not have known the message they gave you. That's what Heather and I talked about. It's hard to tell the message because I've never really thought about it before. But it gave you a message. You were able to walk in differently. And that's that piece of resilience. We don't even feel it happening, but it is building something within inside of us, that relationship that tells you you are good and you deserve good things. And there are people who see the good in you. And that's what we're trying to help the whole world feel and know, is that you were made for a purpose, and that even though things happen to you, that it's always going to work out for his good. And that in that, you get to heal and bring more people to him. And that's the power. That's what I believe is the power of this work. And that it's those safe, secure, stable relationships that do that. Little side fact about kids here is that kids who have that one safe, stable, secure relationship before the age of 18 are 30 times more likely to be successful in life. And when I say successful in life, I don't mean financially. I mean that they have hope, happiness, and health. Those are the outcomes that measures. That is something I can't not provide for kids in the world. And it's also something that I know adults can develop too. So I'm excited to hopefully be able to establish something here for some of you. We're going to come back and revisit this same topic next Wednesday during midweek service, I think is the plan. But we're going to be talking about slightly different things. So it's kind of an intro piece, and we'll go into a little bit deeper piece. And then we're looking to start a group that would meet on Sunday mornings. That starting in February is when we'll be looking to do that. So I hope something kind of resonated with you, and I'd like to sit and chat afterwards if you have something you'd like to talk about or questions that you have. But I'm going to turn it back over to Heather and let her kind of wrap us up here and close us up in prayer, because she's better at that than me.
So I was excited with the opportunity to let Katie talk on to a bigger audience and possibly bring this to the awareness of a lot of us. I feel like that I was raised in a church with how many of you have ever thought, I'm going to bounce around on thoughts because I'm trying to keep my head focused in one way. So how many of you have ever had that thought and you've gone through something, and whether someone said it to you or the message you heard them saying or you heard the world saying to you is you just need to get over it and move on, right? So we go through something that we perceive as traumatic, or that maybe now you're realizing, yeah, that definitely created toxic stress in my life. Maybe today there was toxic stress in your life. I find that teenagers have an ability to create toxic stress in the lives of their parents sometimes. But we kind of get this idea that we just need to get over it and move on. And it's almost like we've become numb to toxic things within our culture, within our community. I find my phone to add toxic stress to my life sometimes. I find Facebook. It's interesting to me that when you really become aware of something, it's whether that happens in our spiritual life, whether that happens in a learning setting, that all of a sudden it's like more things open up for us. That has happened to me. I can think of multiple times in my spiritual walk specifically, and I think it happens every Sunday morning, where it's like Dad does this unbelievable job of taking a scripture and it just opens it up a little more. That's one of the things I think this work on hope does for us. I think the ACE score, I had never been introduced to the ACE study. Katie threw it out on us on a women's group, I think. And I'd never taken one before. But I found myself finding language for a deep cry in my heart to help other people. I feel like we are a body, a community of people that genuinely loves people and genuinely wants to see people get from places of trauma in their lives and move to new areas of their lives. Whether that happens through physical healings, whether that happens in a mental process, a spiritual process, an emotional process. I feel like that we as a church body, it's like I could feel it on Sunday morning when the couples stepped forward for the call on marriage. I was sitting there just praying and thanking God for the courage to step out in that. Because that takes a lot of courage to, in a room full of people, step out for a call on your marriage. Because even if there's nothing like terribly wrong, we all know, we can all agree marriage is tough, that it's not always just rainbows and unicorns. And so to step out in a room full of people and say, I just want prayer. And man, I was thanking God. And I could feel the congregation. It's like we're rooting for him. It's like you can feel the energy from everybody else in the room, whether it's a call for healing in your marriage or in your physical body, the whole room is behind you. What I love about that is I feel like that energy, that spirit-fed energy follows us when we walk out of this room. I think that's one of the unique things about this church. And as Katie began to share, I remember sitting in Julie Jaderson's living room, and I was captivated, and I just began to weep because I began to realize when I met with I call him my crazy doctor. His name's Dr. Hackney. If you want a really good crazy doctor, his name's Gary Hackney. He is in Wichita. He's phenomenal. He looked at me one time, and he said, I had a lot of questions, so I would show up at my Monday morning meeting. I went for a full year, and I normally had a notebook with a list of questions that either someone had asked me and I couldn't answer, or questions I had wanted to understand about why. And so I'd sit with Dr. Hackney and I'd pull out my notebook, and when he would give me answers, I'd make him slow down so I could write down my answers. And he would just giggle at me. And he looked at me one time and he said, Heather, you're an anomaly, but you had the perfect atmosphere for health. But he could never articulate to me why. What created the perfect atmosphere for health? So when I take an ACE score, I score a 6. But when I flip it over, I can have a hope score of 14. I like to call it a hope score over a resilience score because I like the word hope. But that's really what it is, right? The ability to hope, to be resilient. And I know it's because I was raised, and so I kept on Dr. Hackney, and I kept just asking question after question every week. And he said, Heather, he said, if you were any other person, I would tell you to go home, you should sell your house, you should get a new job, and find a whole new group of friends. Because all of your trauma happened in one place. And he said, for your health, I would tell you it would be better if you didn't, because those are where triggers happen, right? When you go back to the same locations, the same places, around the same people. And so over the course of the year, what I began to realize was it did not, though those triggers are real and you're going to struggle with those triggers, there were so many of them that didn't affect me because I had been surrounded by an amount of community that allowed a hope and a resilience to be built up inside of me, even when I didn't even realize it was being built up in the inside of me, which allowed me to overcome. And it didn't just happen, because we have a tendency in the Christian world to just, you can pray it away, or we use the word hope, and really what we're saying is, we'll just wish really hard and maybe it'll go away. But it's about as empty as just get over it. I wanted that no, God did a work. Like when I read the miracles in the body or in the Bible, he picked up dirt and he stuck it in their eyes. Like, what was that in my life? Did he pick up dirt and spit in it and stick it in my eye? What did he do that allowed my eyes to hear, my ears to be opened? And as Dad began to do this book on friendship, and it began to connect so much in what she was saying, I was like, oh, she asked me, the first person that came to my mind was Teresa Webb. I remember, I'm going to cry thinking about it. Teresa Webb was that first, her and Dr. T just became Ashton and I's second set of parents. Just because we forced ourselves to be at her house all the time with her kids. But I just started thinking about Pete and Margaret Lowe. I knew every Sunday morning when I came to church. I don't know if you've met my mom. She doesn't like to touch people, really, ever. I think she hugged me in 1982 when I was born. She's not much of a hugger. And she'd rather not say I love you on a consistent basis unless you're Sean Faulkner and he screams it at you till you repeat it. And so I can remember, but I'm much like my father who, listen, my mother was the perfect mother for my father. Because we all know he has every emotion in the book. And my mom has none of the emotions. And so she was the perfect mate for my father, or we would have had a really hard childhood. But my dad was gone a lot when I was a kid. Mom says that up until the age of 4, if you said dad, I would hold a phone to my head, like a pretend phone, because it was the only time we talked to dad. Then we came to the church, and I have no vivid memory of my dad. We lived in a house on 8th Street, and the house over here, the pink house, I don't know how long we lived in 8th Street, so I was in the 4th grade. I have 2 memories of my dad in that house. But in that era, dads just went to work from sun up to sun. I would assume they were at work. Now, Mom was there. Mom was always there. But Dad was just gone. He was on a mission field. It wasn't a... And what I began to realize was there was always this Margaret Lowe who stood at the door and hugged us when we came in. Jim and Mary Tobias. You never walked past Jim and Mary Tobias without a hug. Dallas and Lester would stand at the doors and you got a hug every time you walked in. Like, I can go through, it wouldn't matter how many different congregation members came through here. I can vividly remember every single face and person that I heard Katie say this, and it was one of my favorite quotes I ever heard her say, and she said, you can borrow hope from someone else. And they just lent me their hope as I ran through the building. And probably, I remember telling a Sunday school teacher one time, I can't remember if it was Billy Steele or Connie Edmonds, but I was being naughty in Sunday school class, and I told them that I could get them fired because my dad was the pastor. I had no idea that Sunday school workers were volunteers, and now I know that nobody that works in children actually really wants to be there. And she was probably going, please get me fired. There's times now, last Sunday morning, first service, I was like, how does someone get fired from this job? Because I'm going to do all of it right now. But I thought that is what we as Christians are supposed to be doing. And I think sometimes we don't know if we know how. We're doing it, but we don't even know if we know how. And one of the things Katie's doing is not only will it bring you aware to just your own past, I think sometimes we push those away because it's hard. And yet there's something about bringing those things into the light that changes the way we see them. And it changes the power that a narrative has when it stands in the light in a safe place than when the enemy can keep us isolated in the dark. And there's so much of a ripple effect that happens with healing. Where one is healed, multitudes are healed. And so I'm excited about those of you that want to take this journey with us. We have no chart for said journey. We are really claiming the word prototype because it sounds really important, but it really means that there is, and you're looking at 2 people that would really like a plan, that like to have it all written, and that we don't have that. We are just following an unction of the Holy Spirit. The Sunday Dad first spoke on trauma and trust, it was taking everything I had on the front row to not turn around and be like, Katie, we first of all, we got to fix a few things he is saying. And part of it is Jed just doesn't always finish his thoughts, when he's in the middle of a thought and he doesn't finish thought. But I was like, at the same time, we knew that there was going to be these things where it's like, yes, I want to move from trauma-based living to trust-based living, but how do I actually do that? I don't have to just go home and go, okay, I'm going to no, there's actually things we can do to intentionally move from one place to another, to change the mindset, that are completely spiritually based. And I love that. And so if you don't want to do it, don't come back next Wednesday. It's fine with me.
You do, bring a friend.
But if there's somebody that you know who's ever struggled, do you know anyone who's been through anything hard? Do you know anyone who's ever been paralyzed by their past? My God, my heart just longs, because I know that there's so much hope in a place that takes this clear understanding. I think it is incredible that the world today has a study on hope. It happened in the University of Kansas. She had to be a part of it. So if you're a KU fan, you should be super proud of this, because there was a professor there, and he did an entire study on hope. Well, if science is proving that hope is a real thing and can make a real impact, how can we as Christians hold that inside and not go look at a friend and say, I know you've struggled with something. Maybe just come and listen. You can think they're quacky. You never have to go back. So we want this to be a safe place. We hope it creates that for you. And again, we won't hold it against you if you don't want to do. I don't even know how many weeks this is going to happen. We have no idea. We have no plan. Feel free to join. If you are serving on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. and you want to find a way to commit and participate in this, to whatever that is, shoot me an email, just at heather@fathershouse.net. I literally just looked at Katie and said, I'm going to figure out a way to make this work. I know many of you serve in different areas, but if you want to be a part of this, it'll change your life. I promise you, you'll be a different person in 6 weeks. So, Father, I just thank you for tonight. I thank you for just, I'm in awe of how you take different people and you connect us together, and you take our stories, and you take the passions and the desires in our hearts, and you knit us together to create this beautiful tapestry that does nothing more than reveal your love to this world. So, Father, I thank you for the gift of Katie to this house. I thank you that you brought her to us, you sent her to us, that would begin to change the colors of that tapestry, to add a new layer to that might bring hope to just one person. Father, thank you for every person in this room, that they too have a story, that knitted together as a community, that, Father, we can be the hands and feet of Christ into our world. We worship you tonight. In your name we pray. Amen.